When I didn't respond to his messages, he called again. This time, he didn't scold me as he did the day before. Instead, he asked gently, "When are you coming home? The house feels so lonely without you." I couldn't help but laugh coldly. Now that Emma was on vacation, he had finally remembered he had a wife. I responded icily, "In a couple of days." He became angry on the other end of the line. "Stop sulking and come home," he demanded. Before I could say anything, he hung up. I could clearly imagine the disgust on his face as he spoke. In his eyes, I was inferior to Emma in every way. Emma's supposed kindness and grace were just a facade. But how could Oliver see through that when he was so deeply infatuated with her? Later that night, Oliver called again, his voice filled with impatience. "Why aren't you home yet?" This time, I simply sent him my location, letting him know I was at the hospital. He arrived half an hour later, storming into the room and asking, "What happened to you?" Although I had expected his reaction, my heart still ached when he actually asked. His tone wasn't particularly warm, but it was less angry than it had been on the phone. "Why aren't you saying anything?" he asked, sitting beside my bed. I caught a glimpse of his phone screen lighting up. The background showed a photo of two hands intertwined, one of which had a faint birthmark that clearly wasn't mine. Oliver quickly turned his phone face down. I smiled bitterly without replying. We sat in silence until his phone rang. Emma's sweet voice came through the speaker. "Brother, why aren't you here to pick me up yet? I've been waiting and I'm getting sleepy." Oliver's eyes shifted nervously as he pursed his lips. He whispered, "Take a taxi home." But Emma wouldn't relent. "No, I'll wait for you here," she replied. After hearing this, Oliver glanced at me twice before grabbing his coat and leaving the hospital room. I smiled bitterly, realizing I would never be his first choice. I sat frozen in the hospital bed for a long while before noticing 2 missed calls on my phone. I called my mother back, and when she heard the weariness in my voice, she asked, "Are you feeling unwell?" I didn't know how to respond immediately, so I mumbled, "Nothing, just tired." She comforted me briefly before saying, "Finish what you're doing and come home soon. Your father and I are waiting for you in Harbor City." My mother knew me better than anyone. After hearing that I didn't want to talk any further, she hung up. My parents had offered to send 2 assistants to help with the divorce, but I declined. After all, it was a 10-year relationship and I wanted to handle its end myself. I stayed in the hospital for 3 more days. During this time, Oliver didn't call once, but he had delivery drivers bring fresh pink roses every morning. This was typical of him. He would send flowers to anyone who was hospitalized. Over the past 10 years, I had learned all of his preferences, but he never bothered to learn mine. I never liked pink roses. Once I was discharged, I went straight home and found Emma sitting on the couch, watching TV while Oliver was in the kitchen. Emma was wearing my new pajamas and my heart sank. I took a deep breath before walking in. When Emma saw me, she jumped up, greeting me enthusiastically. "Sarah, long time no see." As she reached out, I noticed the blue diamond bracelet on her wrist. That was the same bracelet Oliver had won at a charity auction a month ago, even making headlines. Blue had always been my favorite color, and at the time, Rachel had sent me screenshots, saying that this must be Oliver's 10-year anniversary gift for me. When Oliver saw me return, he didn't offer to help with my luggage. He just stood in the kitchen doorway, saying flatly, "Since you're back, join us for a meal." Seeing the clothes scattered on the couch, I refused to give them any face and immediately told Emma to leave. After Emma left, Oliver glared at me angrily before walking out with her. I heard the sound of car engines outside and knew Oliver was furious, but I no longer cared. I had 2 days left to pack, and this house, bought by my parents for me, would be listed with a real estate agent. There were traces of our life together all over the villa. I burned all the photos from the past 10 years, reminiscing over each memory of our time together before setting them alight, including our wedding photos. When we had taken those photos, I had been suffering from acute gastroenteritis and hadn't been in a good condition. So I was unhappy with how they turned out. But Oliver had told me I looked beautiful no matter what, and we promised to retake the wedding photos for our 10th anniversary. I had even chosen the dress collection. but now it seemed pointless. After finishing with Oliver's personal items, I sent him a message. By evening, the door opened, and Oliver stormed in, demanding, "Sarah, what do you mean by this? Why are you asking me to move out?" He seemed to smell the burning in the house and noticed the empty bedside table, incredulously asking, "You burned the photos?" Oliver had probably forgotten that when I used to drag him to take photos, he would dismiss them, complaining, "What's the point of these meaningless photos?" I reflexively replied, "Didn't you always dislike these? They're quite old now." Oliver saw the two large suitcases by the bedroom door and anxiously asked, "What exactly are you trying to do? Do you remember what you promised me?" The sudden question caught him off guard, and he frowned, looking confused. I turned away, pursing my lips, and said, "Never mind, forget I asked." After Oliver received Emma's call and left the hospital, he had told me, "I'll come see you tonight." By the time he saw me, I had already been discharged. Oliver struggled to remember the events for a while. Then, looking guilty, he furrowed his brows and said impatiently, "I had an important business meeting that day and couldn't make it to the hospital. You know how hard I work. Can't you stop being so dramatic?" 6 months ago, when I confronted him about his closeness with Emma, he had reacted similarly, accusing me of being too emotional. "I'm doing all this for the company's development. Why can't you stop being so petty?" From the beginning, it seemed that my insecurity and intuition were just me overreacting. I looked at him silently for a moment before pulling out the divorce papers from behind me. "Oliver, let's get divorced," I said. He froze for a moment, staring at me in disbelief as if he couldn't believe these words were coming from my mouth. "Sarah, do you know what you're saying? Stop making a scene. Divorce isn't something to joke about." His voice dropped lower. In the past, even the slightest frown from him would make me anxious, and I would change my tone immediately. But now his emotions no longer affected me. I looked at him calmly. "You're already sharing a room. With Emma around, keeping me here would just cause more trouble. It's better if we separate." Oliver immediately became uncomfortable, saying that everything was just about work. I let out a cold laugh and pointed to his left hand. "When you lie, at least check if your disguise is complete. You're still wearing matching couple rings with her. That's hardly just for business." Oliver went quiet. After 10 years together, I knew his small expressions well, and I could see his brief panic and unease. What he didn't know was that Emma had already posted pictures of their intertwined fingers on social media. Maybe Oliver didn't expect me to notice so much. We'd been together for a decade, yet he treated me like a stranger. Since I had already given up, it was time to end this. I pinched the bridge of my nose and said tiredly, "Just sign the papers. You can be with the one you truly love, and I'll be free." Oliver's face changed as he heard me, and before I knew it, he grabbed the papers and ripped them apart in front of me. "I won't divorce you. Don't even think about it," he snapped. I sighed in frustration at his stubbornness. When I stayed silent, his tone grew harsh. "Sarah, just because I didn't visit you in the hospital, you're using divorce as a threat? That's childish. We've been together for 10 years. We're already inseparable." When Oliver first took over Grant Corp, I had helped him a lot, but I never asked for anything in return. I responded straightforwardly, "Don't worry, I won't ask for anything in the divorce. The terms are very fair." But Oliver just laughed coldly and said nothing. I looked at him with a cold stare, my heart growing more distant. My marriage to him had been nothing more than a name for a long time. These days, I often wondered why he didn't just propose divorce if he felt nothing for me. Why keep me as a burden? Hearing his words now made me understand. If I hadn't helped with so many important company matters in the past, our relationship would probably have ended much earlier. Oliver kept talking. "You've invested so much in our marriage, how can you just throw away all that effort?" "All right, I'm going to shower. We can talk tomorrow." There was something in his eyes, almost pleading, but I was already too disappointed to continue arguing with him. "Stop avoiding this. Just sign the papers. I don't want to drag this out anymore. After you sign, we'll split the assets evenly and never bother each other again." Hearing this, Oliver became anxious. Can't you understand what I'm saying? We'll talk tomorrow. He had always been the dominant one in our relationship, never accepting opposition. But I was tired of dealing with his forceful attitude. I responded firmly. No matter what you think, I want a divorce. I've made my decision. If you won't sign, we'll go straight to court. Before he could respond, I stood up to leave. Oliver suddenly lunged at me, shouting, "No, I won't agree to a divorce, and you're not going anywhere." His movement was aggressive, and I couldn't dodge in time. I was knocked back onto the sofa. A sharp pain shot through my abdomen, and I gasped as my back became damp with sweat. Seeing my pained expression, Oliver immediately jumped up and grabbed my arm. "What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell?" I quickly pushed his hand away. "No need to worry, Mr. Grant. I'm fine." When I used my formal, businesslike tone, Oliver stiffened. Over the years, no matter how he treated me, I always called him sweet names like honey or darling. To be honest, when I first heard Emma call him brother, I cried for 2 hours. It seemed like this was the first time our relationship had felt so distant. My cold words were meant to let him know that things could never return to how they were. Sweat gathered on my forehead, and Oliver, shocked, asked, "What's really wrong with you? Let me take you to the hospital." He grabbed my arm anxiously, his tone tinged with blame. "Why did you leave the hospital when you weren't fully recovered?" I pushed his hand away again, laughing coldly. "What were you doing when I was hospitalized? Why put on this concerned act now? Who are you performing for?" "You knew I was sick, but did you ever check on me?" Oliver's face went pale as he tried to explain. "The company's been really busy lately, so I couldn't take care of you." I frowned and interrupted him impatiently. "Enough. I don't want to hear any more of your excuses." When the accident happened, I had called Oliver, but not only did he not believe me, he accused me of seeking attention. During our marriage, Oliver's parents had always wanted a grandchild. I'll never forget the joy I felt when the doctor told me I was pregnant. I'll also never forget the heartbreak when the doctor said I had lost too much blood from the accident and that the impact was too severe to save the baby. I pulled out the medical report and threw it at Oliver. "I carried your child willingly, and when I lost it, I grieved alone for days. Now, I don't want any connection with you anymore. Let me go, and let yourself go too." If I could turn back time, I would never have been so foolish as to take him to the hospital when I saw him hurt while playing basketball. Thinking back, Oliver and I had met on the first day of freshman year. He had injured himself playing basketball and was sitting on the ground in pain. I happened to walk by and offered to take him to the hospital. He was wearing white sportswear, looking bright and handsome. Later, Oliver added me on social media to thank me. We gradually became closer, eating together in the cafeteria, studying together in the library, and going out for meals and movies. In the beginning, we were truly in love, and our friends envied us. No matter the time, Oliver would always wait for me to get home before going to sleep. He never missed an anniversary or birthday. My cold attitude made Oliver panic. I struggled to get up from the sofa and pulled my suitcase toward him. "Let's go." Just then, the doorbell rang. Irritated, I opened the door to find Emma standing there, wearing the latest Chanel outfit from the season, something I hadn't had the chance to buy yet. "Sarah, is Oliver home?" she asked. I glanced back at Oliver, only to find Emma sizing me up with an amused expression. I ignored her and tried to walk past, but she stepped in front of me, blocking my way. I held back my anger and asked, "Why are you blocking me?" Emma pulled out a small package from her arms, smiling. "Last night, Oliver got drunk and left his clothes at my place. I was worried he'd need them, so I brought them over for him." I looked down and saw intimate apparel peeking out from the loosely wrapped package. Even though I had completely given up on Oliver, seeing this still stung. The sight of these things still made me laugh bitterly. I pointed toward the living room and said, "Talk to him directly." With that, I pushed her aside and slammed the door shut. Just as it closed, Oliver rushed over, shouting frantically, "Sarah, this isn't over. We need to talk this through properly." The car door slammed, and I pressed my lips together without responding. I headed straight to my company. After agreeing to stay with Oliver, I had started a design business, which had grown from just 5 employees to a fairly sizable one. However, after careful thought, I had decided to leave, but I also made the choice to keep the company. Many employees had worked hard alongside me to build it, and I couldn't bear the thought of them job hunting elsewhere. I had already arranged with my family to send 2 capable people to manage it. I was about to enter the building when several employees saw me and appeared surprised. I was puzzled until my assistant approached. "Sarah, why are you here today? Didn't Oliver say you weren't feeling well and needed to rest?" I quickly checked my phone, noticing numerous unread messages and several missed calls from Oliver. I opened the company group chat and a notification popped up. Oliver had posted that, "Sarah isn't feeling well lately, so please handle company matters independently for now, led by my assistant." Everyone in the group sent their well wishes, but I just felt furious. What was Oliver trying to pull now? He had been unclear with Emma, but was now pretending to be the caring husband. Who was he putting on a show for? I was about to clear things up when Oliver suddenly appeared and grabbed my arm. "Honey, why did you come to the company when you're sick?" he asked, his voice full of joy as he held a bouquet of pink roses and gazed at me with what seemed like deep affection. The employees greeted Oliver respectfully, and he smiled back, holding my hand tightly. I yanked my hand away and said coldly, "Oliver, I've already told you. We have no relationship anymore. Please stop crossing boundaries." The room went silent in shock. My assistant's eyes widened as she asked, "Sarah, what does this mean?" Surprisingly, Oliver didn't get angry. Instead, he pulled me into the office and shut the door. His tone became more guilty and remorseful. On the way here, I really thought about our 10 years together and finally understood my true feelings. He began, "From the beginning, you've always been the one I loved. I just got so caught up in growing the company and unintentionally neglected you. There's nothing between Emma and me. You have to believe me, it's all just a misunderstanding." I felt exhausted, and now being pestered again, my tone was full of impatience. "Stop explaining. I don't care about what happened between you two anymore. That's between you and her. No need to explain to me." Oliver's expression turned sorrowful. "I don't believe it," he said. "How can you just throw away our 10 years of love? Those shorts were at her place because I drank too much and threw up on them. That's why I changed. I know how good you've been to me all these years. Emma and I are just boss and secretary. I never cheated. Trust me." I stared at him, wanting to ask if he really knew what a normal boss-secretary relationship should look like. He wore matching couple rings with Emma, often took her to parties, and shared countless intimate moments with her. Now, he had the audacity to accuse me of not trusting him enough. I sighed deeply and shook my head. "Oliver, my giving up on you isn't because of one or two things. I've accumulated too much disappointment. I don't love you anymore." When I said those last words, tears welled up in Oliver's eyes and he shouted emotionally, "Don't say that. Have you forgotten our vows? You promised you'd stay by my side forever, that you'd love me forever. I'm heartbroken about losing the baby, but we can have children in the future, right?" I waited calmly for his outburst to end before speaking softly. "Oliver, you're too emotional right now. Let's talk later. Please leave." Hearing these words, Oliver froze for a moment, then quickly realized these were the exact words he had used with me before. I remembered the first time I confronted Oliver after seeing intimate messages from Emma while he was in the shower. We had a huge fight that night. Faced with my hysteria, Oliver had offered no explanation and just left. I chased him all the way to his car, begging him to stay and talk. He flatly refused. "Sarah, your emotions are too unstable right now. You're acting crazy. We'll talk when you've calmed down." Now, those same words hit Oliver hard. He opened his mouth, but then lowered his gaze in disappointment. "Is this really all we can be? Can you really let go?" Seeing me nod firmly, he choked up a bit and said, "I'll come back tomorrow." With that, he rushed out of the office in a panic. That evening, Oliver ordered takeout from my favorite restaurant and arranged for dinner and milk tea for all the employees. I saw him waiting outside the company building. I told him to leave, but he refused. "Sarah, I'm doing this to show you that I really care about you. I'm willing to use this method to win you back. I called him crazy, but Oliver stubbornly persisted. Exhausted, I decided to stop fighting back. Oliver mistook my silence as me softening and excitedly said, "See you tomorrow," before leaving. I only had one day left in River City, so I arranged to have dinner with a few close friends. After being with Oliver, I had spent most of my time at home waiting for him, except during work hours. It had been a long time since I had gathered with friends, so when they invited me, I agreed eagerly. My body hadn't fully recovered, so I could only toast with tea as we caught up. I told them about the divorce directly, and everyone was shocked. They all knew how much I had sacrificed for Oliver. Rachel touched my hand sympathetically and said, "You've really been through a lot." My thoughts drifted as the years of devotion replayed like a movie in my mind. The laughter around me grew jarring, and I softly said goodbye. Just then, the door to the private room opened. Though the person had his head down and wore a mask, I recognized Oliver instantly. He nodded slightly at everyone as a greeting, then pulled out a chair and sat down quietly beside me. He was cold to everyone except me. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice polite but distant. Everyone could tell I was deliberately keeping my distance from him. He frowned, displeased, but I coldly told him, "You don't need to do this. We're already going through divorce procedures." "I will not agree to divorce," he said, taking a deep breath and cutting off my words. "Aren't you just upset that I neglected you because of Emma? I'll have HR fire her right now." With that, he picked up my wine glass and stood up, his tone returning to its usual arrogance. "I've had some conflicts with Sarah lately, but as you all know, we've been together for 10 years. She's been very good to me all these years. So this time I want to win her back. I hope everyone—" Oliver didn't seem to mind my uninvited arrival. After he finished speaking, he raised his glass and amidst everyone's shocked gazes, he moved it toward his lips. But before it could touch them, I snatched it away. "Enough, Oliver. We're done. All of this is pointless now." The glass slammed onto the table as soon as I finished speaking. Ignoring his embarrassed expression, I left immediately with my friends, not caring about the slight redness in his eyes. The streets were dimly lit as we walked, and Rachel, concerned for my safety, insisted on accompanying me home. We sat by the large windows all night. The next morning, Oliver returned with 2 bags of hot breakfast. He watched with satisfaction as Rachel and I finished eating before leaving. I entrusted Rachel with managing the divorce and handling the house matters, then went straight to the airport. My arranged marriage partner, James Wilson, was waiting at the airport with a bouquet of my favorite sunflowers. My parents accompanied him, and he kindly took my luggage before driving us home. James had been my desk mate since elementary school, and we had always gotten along well. When my parents told me about the arranged marriage with him, I wasn't against it. James knew all my preferences, and that evening, the table was full of dishes I loved. He served me food attentively, not rushing to mention the engagement throughout dinner. After the meal, I took a walk and talked with my parents about everything that had happened recently. Upon hearing that I had just had a miscarriage, my parents insisted I rest for the next 2 weeks and avoid catching a cold. Their warmth felt like a lifetime ago. Over the next week, James came by every evening for dinner, always bringing gifts. It reminded me of the graduation party in our senior year of high school, when he had brought a trunk full of presents to confess his feelings for me. During our school days, he always protected me, but I had only seen him as my closest neighbor brother. When his confession failed, James didn't get upset. Instead, he told me that no matter what challenges I faced, he would always be there for me. I was touched, but I knew that being moved wasn't the same as love. When I returned home, I changed my phone number. Rachel told me that Oliver had been desperately searching for me, but I no longer cared. 2 weeks later, after most of my body had recovered, James took me abroad for a week. We enjoyed the Azure Sea, visited many art exhibitions, and he even arranged a grand confession ceremony in a foreign country. This time, I accepted his proposal. I knew he truly cared about me and would always treat me well. After returning, we held our engagement ceremony. Oliver attended, and during the ring exchange, he stormed in with a dark expression. He rushed over, grabbed my ring, and shouted, "Don't marry him. You promised you would love me forever. Have you forgotten?" The guests stared, and the entire room erupted in chaos. I had prepared for many things, but I didn't expect Oliver to be so shameless. I angrily called security, but Oliver still wouldn't back down, shouting, "I won't let you marry him. You're mine." During the trip, my divorce with Oliver had gone to court, and thanks to the solid evidence I provided, the divorce was granted smoothly. Rachel informed me that Oliver had declared he would search everywhere to find me. This time, he really did find me, but in an unreasonable manner. Angrily, I held James's hand and walked over to Oliver. "We're already divorced. Why are you still so shameless and clingy? You're the one who cheated with your secretary. It was all your fault. I don't want to see you again. Please leave." Seeing my firm attitude, Oliver yelled as he was dragged away. "What makes him better than me?" This time I didn't respond. In my eyes, James was better than Oliver in every way. James wouldn't neglect me, and I was confident he would never betray me. After the engagement ceremony, I officially took over Wilson Corp. James promised to always support me. I made a bold decision, though. I handed the management of Wilson Corp to James and chose to study abroad for a year. James didn't try to stop me, instead arranging everything for me. During that year, we met every 2 weeks. James would take exhausting 15-hour flights just to spend 3 days with me. He cooked for me, held my hand during walks, and said goodnight to me every day. After I finished my studies abroad, he picked me up and we returned to Harbor City. Our wedding was scheduled for a month later. My parents had a long conversation with me saying that James had always been their ideal son-in-law. I knew this, but back then, I was too lovesick to listen to their advice. Fortunately, it wasn't too late. James gave me the grandest wedding in Harbor City, decorating everything in my favorite orange color. We exchanged vows of lifelong love and commitment, holding each other tightly. After exchanging rings, James choked up as he told me, "I finally have you. I'm so glad I never gave up." I nodded in response, saying, "Thank you for always waiting for me." Our wedding was perfect, surrounded by everyone's blessings. After the wedding, we went to see the northern lights for our honeymoon. Under the starry sky, he promised again to love me for life. A year later, when I showed signs of pregnancy, James picked me up excitedly, cheering. Rachel told me that after our divorce, Oliver had fallen into decline. His company's stock price plummeted, and many competitors took advantage of the situation, uncovering evidence of his tax evasion. Oliver's assets were seized overnight due to back taxes, late fees, and a huge fine, leaving him with nothing. I heard that he later got into a fight at a bar and was convicted of intentional assault, receiving a sentence of over 7 years in prison. As for Emma, after being fired, she caused several scenes at Grant Corp and repeatedly threatened to commit suicide. Oliver had her sent directly to a mental hospital. James was with me when I received that call. When Rachel asked if I regretted anything, my answer was no. Without going through all of that, I wouldn't cherish what I have now so deeply.